Hello, everyone. Professor George here, and today we are actually going to be talking about family partnerships, and I have a special guest with us. She is a parent and also a parent advocate. She worked for Michigan Alliance for Families, and I'd like her to introduce herself to us. Hello, Angie. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Pam. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk with you. Yes, as you stated, I'm Angie Arnold, and I have two children with special needs. One has received special education services through an IEP, and the other child has a 504 plan.
All right. So we are actually learning how to work and include parents in the process, as it is the law that the parent is an equal partner. And so as educators, what are some, maybe we want to learn from you, what are some considerations that you would appreciate from a teacher who's working with your child?
Yes, thank you for the question. So to reiterate the question, you're saying what are the considerations that I as a parent or any parent would appreciate
Yeah,
from a teacher working with my child
right.
as the student? I would like to just add a little more to that and say not just a teacher or special education teacher or gen ed teacher, but all multidisciplinary team members
Yes.
who provide services in the IEP should be asked this question about. So I have 3 points, basically. One you just hinted at.
Mhm.
One first, as a parent, we ask that you, the teacher or the service provider, treat parents as equal partners in the student's IEP and special education services. Communicate with the parent
Mm.
the student's progress proactively throughout the school year. Number two, it is imperative to graph targeted IEP goals
Mm.
and benchmarks. Understand what you're graphing and provide to parents with quarterly progress reports, plus what you should do next, most importantly, with what the graph data tells you. And third, teachers and service providers need to know or be familiar, including how to access and review parental resources provided by law
Mm.
in the IEP documentation, which is usually in the last page of the IEP that's being signed.
Right. Right.
Uh, Especially, you should know parental procedural safeguards
Mhm.
as stated in the IDEA,
Yep.
and in Michigan, as stated in MARS, or the Michigan Administrative Rules for Special Education. I would like to, if you don't mind, Pam, give an example of why my first and second points should be taken into consideration.
Okay.
Uh,
So let me
and
summarize what you expressed, because you had a, a lot of valuable information there. So the first thing is you really desire for the educators to be equal partners with you. And then the
yeah,
educators to really progress monitor and communicate the goals and where your student is making progress on a quarterly basis or as often as possible. So communication is important. And you also want educators to be familiar with the laws, to be able to communicate that to you. So in terms of whether it's procedural safeguards or resources that would be beneficial for you to help your students. So it's an equal partnership. Am I right?
yes.
Okay. And so go ahead. Tell us more. This is awesome.
Okay, great. So in regards to point one and two there, uh, I had a situation, I guess to give you a little background, with my child who receives IEP. He's been receiving IEPs now for 5 years. And he is in the gen ed population, so he gets pulled out for special education services. He's not an all-inclusive
Full inclusion.
type.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. so when he was in third grade, he was getting pulled out for a specific service that had to do with a reading goal by his special education teacher. During the annual IEP, as a parent, I requested that graphical data be included, and for the progress reports.
Sure.
I just mentioned that right now, but I'll tell you in a minute why that was important. um, and the goal, I was informed as a parent that my child was behind in his reading skill level a year. So he was a third grader, but they were telling me he was reading second grade. So he needed to be pulled out for services to catch up. And the measurement evaluation was the Pontus and Fennell reading system. So my child would get pulled out 3 times a week for 20 minutes from special ed teacher from his gen ed classroom, and then he would go to the resource room and she would do the intervention for 20 minutes and then return him back to the classroom. When I first received the first quarterly progress report and saw the graph data, I could see that it was kind of variable. The data was up and down. And I was like, okay, well, we'll see what happens on the second quarter because it's only been probably about a month and a half of data. Second quarter comes around and I can see that it's declining. Instead of improving, is now getting worse. So I started questioning, like, well, what's going on with intervention? You know, I go and I proactively seek out the special education teacher and ask, if she could show me, the data that she's evaluating the child with. She gave me samples of the data and we had a nice discussion. I tested my son with the same reading material, and then he answered the questions, which is what the teacher does. And then she grades it and puts a data point, right? So now she has 3 data points at least per week. So there's 12 data points per month, So she has enough data points, And the goal was that he would get 80% or higher, for the annual goal. And he was not meeting those benchmarks. But when he did that with me at home, he got 100%. And material was actually below other material that he's been reading at home. So I went back to teacher and told her, well, is there anything else going on? Because he scored well at home in the environment. And so we discovered and discussed with the gen ed teacher that basically my son did not want to get pulled out for class. He wanted to stay in his classroom with his peers. He didn't want to be differentiated. And so what he was doing was rushing to do this intervention as quickly as possible to get back to his classroom. So I told the teacher, hey, let's look at this, what's happening, right before he went into the resource room. What was the antecedent? The stimulus environment, and then look at that behavior and then what the response was, or the consequence. We're talking ABC data here, antecedent behavior and consequence. And she started noting that for me because I asked, and I really appreciate that because she had busy time, but she realized that maybe this is a behavioral issue and it had nothing to do with the disability of reading. So I asked her then, so then I decided to talk to my son and I said, hey, did you realize that, I understand that you don't like going to the classroom, you stay with your peers and, in class. But when you go to the resource room, your special ed teacher, she's still going to test you. And if you don't score a certain amount, and I showed him the graph because he understands that, he says, you're going to still continue to be pulled out. But if you start getting, I bet you if you start getting 80% or higher, the next month, she's probably going to talk to me and say, hey, maybe we should pull you out. And then stop, getting pulled out to the resource room and you'll stay in class. His eyes went really big and he's like, oh, wow, that's a light bulb hit him. So guess what? We did that for a month and then he started scoring 80 to 100% consistently.
Wow.
And at the end, after 1 month, we removed that. And now he's a fifth grader. We're starting forward, and he's at grade reading level with his peers in fifth grade, all the
Wow.
way from the end of third grade. Now, that is wow, right? But it took me as a proactive parent and having this data to realize that. What if I'm a parent who is not as proactive? Because one, I'm not aware that I have, you know, point number 3, procedural rights. Okay, and number 2, I don't know how to access data, or I don't understand because you're not providing it to me. I'm expecting you to be proactive towards me and help my child for his best interests. You know, then it's really upon you as the teacher to be proactive, because that is what you're being hired to do.
Mhm.
The only person who suffers here is the child, is the student. A lot of times, children, the intervention might not work because there's something going on that's causing a certain behavior that it's maladaptive, and it has to do with the environment,
Right.
you know.
So let me pause you.
And
Let me pause you for a second, because you have given us so much valuable information, and I want to make sure that we understand it. So you, as a parent, that equal partnership you highlighted so beautifully in this example with your son, and you also showed us how important progress monitoring is, and that communicating with the parent, and not only communicating, the teacher is able to see if the student is not making progress, they have to try something different, they have to communicate, talk to you, and that open partnership would, they could change the intervention or find out what's really going on. If we don't have that relationship, that would not have worked. And now you're talking about the procedural safeguards and the rights of the parents. If a parent does not know these rights, they are not able to be that equal partner. Is that right? Yeah, go ahead.
that's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. Thank you for mentioning that, Pam, because as you're as an educator, you know the law, you've been educated in it, and there are serious consequences if
Mhm.
you break it.
Right.
And parents who tend to get frustrated will research
Yeah.
and will find out a way to get help for their child, because the parents are 100% vested in their child.
That's
They
right.
love their child. They know them. They're with them 24 hours a day. They know their behaviors, their idiosyncrasies, and we want the best for them.
Yep.
Well, the teacher has just a glimpse in the
Mm,
school setting of the
that's right.
child, right? So that's why you have to advocate. You
Mhm.
have to be proactive,
Mhm.
and teach the parent if they don't know, and it's okay.
Yeah.
When parents are sought out, they feel valued, they feel like you care, and
Mhm.
that you can collaborate for the child. Um, and that is where I think there's always an error. And the 5 years of experience with different educators, I have some fantastic ones, and then I've had some that are not so fantastic.
Mhm.
And, unfortunately, uh, we'd have to use our procedural safeguards
Right.
to ensure that my child, our children get the best access they can have for special education. They should never go there.
Right.
Um, and so now I want to say a little bit about the graphing. I know that as teachers, you go like, ah, I tell you what, it's not as difficult as it sounds. Yes, there's software programs that make it difficult to input the data, right? But you can manually draw this. You can do an Excel sheet, and yes, it might take a little bit of time at first, but
Mhm.
once you have that template, you can copy it easily from student to student, and it only not benefits you, but it benefits the child, obviously, and the people you're sharing the data with. And I think I had drew a basic graph that I'd sent you, Pam. So I hope you're
Yeah.
willing to share it. But basically, it's very simple. On the y-axis, you have the benchmark, the goal that you are targeting to evaluate, right? And you're providing services for. And then on the x-axis, you have the time. And the data is showing that it's sloping upwards, then the intervention is working, and that's awesome. But if it's flatlined, or if it's sloping downwards, or it's variable, then that is a huge hint that something is not working with the intervention, and that's when you, the teacher, need to think out of the box and not waste time. A lot of times I think the problem is that, you teachers are trying to manage their time, their
Right?
small amount of time they have with each student in their caseload. You have to be careful of just, going through the mill. It's like, I'm doing this interventions, what's written, one kid done, check mark, next kid
Yeah.
done, check mark. They're not looking at the data, what's showing you and what you can prove for the kid. That's not why I assume most teachers in special education go to school to become special education teachers. They have a passion to help kids.
Yeah.
Don't let that get lost in the system once you start to work in a public setting or any setting.
Yeah.
Um, so that's just
Yeah.
something I'm throwing there.
Yeah. Well,
And also, and
yeah,
just last thing,
let me
Pam,
let me
last
summarize,
thing.
let me summarize what you said, because you have really highlighted some very important. I think it's important that assessment drives learning, and using a progress monitoring chart and putting in those data points and looking at the graph at least on a weekly basis will inform you whether or not you should change something, whether or not you should communicate with a parent, whether or not you see if that intervention is working. So thank you for bringing
Right.
these highlights in. Yeah, and so we are running out of time. So one last point that you want to put in, what would you want to say to the educators today?
Um, I want to say to educators, if you feel overwhelmed, don't worry about it. Please go to Michigan Alliance for
Yeah.
Families.org,
Mhm.
and you can get a parental perspective into the special education process.
Yeah.
And this information is free for anyone, including service providers.
Yeah.
And thank you so much, Pam, for allowing me to share
Yes.
uh, these considerations with you.
Yes, thank you so much for joining. We've learned so much from you. I think just developing that family partnership and remembering that parents and family members know their child the most, and such a valuable resource that we can tap into. So develop that rapport with the parents and communicate and inform them of their rights, and bring them on as equal team members on an IEP team. So thank you for your insights, and we will tap into your knowledge in the future. So thanks. And
That's
we'll
great.
definitely
Thank
check
you, Pam.
out the Michigan Alliance for Families. Thank you for that resource. All right
You're
then.
welcome.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.